Actually, the leap of faith, to give it the memorable name that Soren Kierkegaard bestowed upon it, is an imposture. As he himself pointed out, it is not a leap that can be made once and for all. It is a leap that has to go on and on being performed in spite of mounting evidence to the contrary. This effort is actually too much for the human mind and leads to delusions and manias. Religion understands perfectly well that the leap is subject to sharply diminishing returns, which is why it often doesn't in fact rely on faith at all, but instead corrupts faith and insults reason.
You are listening to A Leap of Doubt, the podcast that celebrates science, secular humanism, and the courage it takes to embrace an evidence-based life of doubt and questioning. Hey everyone, Nathan Dickey here. On this episode, I'm bringing you a great interview I did with internationally recognized dating coach and author Harris O'Malley, aka Doctor NerdLove, in which we discuss and break down common modern myths and misconceptions about love, sex, and dating. But first I have this brief shout out to give for two really cool people I know, named Yvette, some of you out there may also know her as the SciBabe, and Alice. They are starting a brand new podcast that I'm really excited to start following, and which I think might be of interest to you as well. It's called Two Girls, One Mic, the Porncast. It's a unique idea and something that I think will fill a niche that's been missing. I'll let Yvette and Alice explain why in this promo clip they recorded.
Hi, I'm Yvette.
And I'm Alice.
And we're hosting a brand new podcast, Two Girls, One Mic.
The podcast that talks about the holes and the plot holes of your favorite porn.
Well, maybe not your favorite.
Well, they're all somebody's favorite, like Game of Bones,
Back to the Future,
Star Horse,
Edward Penis Hands,
Pulp Friction.
And according to Rule 34, we'll never run out of content.
Nothing is off limits, and we're bringing you the best guests to talk about everything.
Porn stars,
sexperts,
scientists,
Bigfoot enthusiasts,
comedians,
porn script writers, and many more.
We'll have time to cram it all in.
Cram in.
We're adults.
So hit subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts, because everyone's a critic. We just do it with porn.
So, check out Two Girls, One Mic if you are so inclined, because how awesome is it that two wickedly smart people are talking about both critical thinking and porn together. And now, on to the interview. You are listening to A Leap of Doubt. I'm your host, Nathan Dickey. Very special thanks go out to each one of my patrons, Jeff Prebeg, Jeanne, Ikerd, Torsten, Pihl, Chris Watson, and Kim Bojkovsky. Your support is highly appreciated. As regular listeners are aware by now, I cover a wide range of topics and social issues on this podcast, and some eyebrows might be raised at the fact that I'm talking about dating advice in this episode. There is a very good reason for that. The overarching theme of this podcast has to do with questioning and challenging common assumptions and our deeply held intuitions about things in the interest of learning to think critically and become better people and do our small part in creating a better world within our sphere of influence, which is larger than each of us might believe. And I think it's important and worthwhile to talk about how men and women relate to and read each other. There are all manner of misconceptions and potentially harmful myths surrounding what women want, what men want, and about how best to navigate romantic relationships, from flirting to dating to long-term. This being the case, I am very excited to have as my special guest Harris O'Malley, also known as Doctor NerdLove. Harris O'Malley is an internationally recognized blogger, YouTuber, and dating coach, author of New Game Plus, The Geek's Guide to Love, Sex, and Dating. And I got her number, now what? A Geek's Guide to Texting. Welcome, Harris.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you. So I thought we might begin by discussing your origin story, when you first became interested in dating advice as a career, and what the process of becoming Doctor NerdLove was like, because everyone likes a superhero origin story.
Well, I fell into dating advice as a career completely backwards. This is not something that I thought I was ever going to actually pursue. But the way that this all came about is I used to be as bad, if not worse, than a lot of my clients. I was the sort of person where I had no idea how to interact with women. My idea of flirting is, do you like stuff? Like, I could not talk to women I was interested in. I did not know how to attract women. The only relationships I'd ever gotten into were pure chance. My idea of how stuff was supposed to work all came from pop culture. You know, I considered Dickey to be my patron saint. And that worked about as well as you might think. And this was made worse by the fact that I had so many friends who were just naturally socially gifted. In fact, one of my oldest and dearest friends, I call him Miles on the site, he is the sort of person who attracts women the way that cheese attracts mice. And he looks like the love child of Rob Lowe and Zac Efron. And then to make matters worse, he's also genuinely funny and the nicest guy you'll ever meet. And so whenever he was around, my brother, my friends, and I, we would all might as well have been invisible while Miles was in the picture. And one night, at my brother's wedding, Miles and I both were interested in the same woman, and we ended up going head to head. And long story short, she liked him better. And so I, for lack of a better term, lost. And that alone stung, but at least that was something I was used to. I'm used to women liking Miles more than me. What really drove it home, though, was the fact that his hotel room was literally right next to mine. So for the rest of that night, it was just a case of not sure if loud sex or exorcism. So as all of this is going on, and I am just sitting there crying and alternately just listening in intently, I had what I call my Batman moment, where if you're at all familiar with the Batman mythos, it's the bat crashing through the window, and Bruce Wayne says, "Oh, it's a sign I shall become a bat because criminals are a cowardly and superstitious lot." For me, instead of having a bat crashing through my window, which would have been way more dramatic, it was typing in, "How do I get good with girls?" into Google. And that led me to a copy of Neil Strauss's The Game. And at first I was reading that and I was like, okay, so what you're saying is that social skills can be learned. It's not just a case of I either have it or don't. And as I was going through this and trying to figure out how I was going to learn how to do all this stuff, I found out that there was a mystery method boot camp going on in my town. And so I thought about this for the span of like 5 seconds and said, you know what, I may be throwing money away, but I have to try this. And I'm not exaggerating when I say it was literally transformative and it changed my life. And I had an amazing experience about this and I learned so much. And for a long time, I was in the pickup scene until one night when I was about to go home with someone who I was taking home from a club. And I just realized, like, almost like a bolt out of the blue, that I couldn't do this, because I realized I was sitting here flirting with her, waiting for my car to come back from the valet, and realized that, okay, my plan is, how am I going to sleep with this person and then leave and never see her again? And I am just coming up with this absurdly elaborate way of how I'm just going to get out of her place, because I wasn't bringing her back to mine. And I realized, like, I can't do this. I don't like her that much. I don't like me that much when I'm like this. I really don't like how much money I've been spending on going to bars and clubs that I don't like 4 or 5 nights a week. And just like, I tell her, you know, hey, I'm sorry, I can't do this. It's not you, it's me. I don't like you. I need to go home and have a long, dark night of the soul. And that long, dark night ended up being like damn near a week of me just having kind of a minor breakdown of like, I have been so incredibly fake and so incredibly manipulative, and I just can't take it anymore. But at the same time, I liked the sex I was having. So I wanted to figure out, how can I have this social success without being so toxic, without being so manipulative, and without having to be incredibly fake and inauthentic. And so I had to go back and just relearn everything, up to including everything that I learned from Mystery Method and all the other like pickup gurus that I had studied under, and like had to get back to just first causes. Why were we taught that this is true and that women want this, or that we need to act this way? How much of this is true? How much of this is just bullshit? And so I went and studied everything that I could get my hands on. I got like every book I could on gender relations, on psychology, on human sexuality, especially like male and female sexuality, and just realized how much of what I had been taught was based on stereotypes and based on mistaken ideas about what men and women actually want and actually like.
It's not always so obvious or clear what men want, what women want, and how we should behave, because I was talking to an evolutionary psychologist just today, actually, who was talking about this innate biological drive that we have. Men look for quantity, women look for quality. Generally speaking, that's our evolutionary legacy as men and women. And we're getting to the point as a society, as a global society and culture, where we're able to take a step back and assess ourselves and where we are and what we're doing in a more critical light, figure out what's best for individuals and for society as a whole, and that this preoccupation with men getting as much sex as possible just isn't working out, and there's a better way to live.
Yeah, and a lot of what I had to unlearn was the idea that what you just said, that women look for quality and men look for quantity, which isn't true. A lot of that is actually social. Women want sex as much as men do, and often in the same amount that we do. The problem is that for us as a society, it's a raw deal for women, because not only are there more risks for them in terms of pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections, but also more often than not, the guys who are, putting themselves out there for them to sleep with aren't that good at sex, and they're usually insulting her for letting them sleep with her in the first place. So more often than not, they're opting not to have as much sex as they could, because the risk isn't worth the reward. When they feel like the sex would be worth it and the risk is low enough, then women are just as horny.
There's a really strange double standard in society, isn't there? When women want sex, they're quote-unquote sluts or whores. Men, I can't think of any equivalent name that men are called for liking sex and going out and seeking it.
I mean, at worst, we get called like dogs or pervs, and even then, it's kind of semi-affectionate.
You mentioned toxic behaviors, and this is an issue that's been making the rounds in a lot of discussion online and in other places recently. It's come up a lot in the context of the hashtag #MeToo, especially this idea of toxic masculinity. And this is a concept that is so misunderstood, and there's so many misconceptions about it. And
oh God, you're right.
Maybe we can unpack that term a little bit, and closely related to that, kind of as a lead-in to kind of illustrate the point, why is Fight Club one of the most misunderstood films of our generation?
The whole idea behind toxic masculinity, and the reason why it gets misunderstood, is because people hear that phrase and they think, oh, you're saying being masculine or being male is inherently toxic. And that's not what anybody is saying. The idea behind toxic masculinity is that there are behaviors and attitudes and outlooks that are societally coded as masculine and are presented as good or laudable or to be endorsed as something we should be doing, when in reality they're harmful either to the individual or to society as a whole. And a lot of times it's in terms of things like, how do you measure your worth as a man? And it really comes down to, in a lot of ways, how much sex are you having? What is your capability of violence? What emotions are you allowed to express, and which ones are you supposed to repress? And the ideas that we have about what it means to be a man are incredibly fragile, because they're external and they're performative. They are things that men do instead of just being intrinsic to being a man. And so even stuff that seems relatively benign, like the idea of what is a real man? Well, a real man is a provider and he provides for his family. Okay, on its surface, that seems fine. Except this is once again taking the idea of what it means to be a man outside of yourself. It's externalizing this locus of control, because what happens to somebody, as happens to a lot of people, when they have a job, a well-paying job, but the person who owns the company they work for sells it and moves all the jobs to China or to Indonesia or some other place. Suddenly, this man has lost his job. He has lost his status as provider through no fault of his own, and now his manhood is called into
kind of paradoxical, isn't it? This idea of manhood, this social construction of what it means to be a man, strength, virility, aggression, and yet it's fragile and it can be taken away from you at any moment. And there's no sense of control over it, even though control and power and strength is part of the narrative.
Yeah, and it makes it impossible for men to trust or relate to one another, because part of the ideas of toxic masculinity is that men aren't emotional and that we don't get emotionally intimate with other people, especially other men, unless sex is involved. We treat emotional intimacy as the same as sexual or romantic intimacy. And so we are isolated from everyone except for potential sex partners. And now this means that we have no real friends. We have no real connection. And we are all desperately lonely and looking for a connection that we don't allow ourselves to have unless there is that chance that sex is involved. And so we are afraid to open up to our friends or even our family members for fear of being seen as effeminate or for being seen as trying to hit on them or trying to set a romantic relationship.
And this goes into a question that a good friend of mine, Callum McDonald, wanted me to ask and bring up. And shout out to him because he was the one that first introduced me to your channel a while back. So he's also a big fan of your work. He wrote, "You speak about men forming more intimate and emotional bonds with each other, but how do we go about establishing such relationships when the current quote-unquote bro code paradigm is still so dominant? How do you go about making your current male friendships more meaningful when it's highly likely your friends are still caught in brolosophy?"
The way that I put it is that it as much as I hate to make it sound like something you could find on a bumper sticker, you kind of have to be the change that you want to see. So the thing is, the idea that men don't have intimate, close friendships with other men is relatively recent. You can look back in terms of even like 40 years ago and see men who are much more demonstrative and affectionate with their male friends. And I mean, literally, like, you can find pictures of best friends with their arms around each other or leaning up against one another in ways that these days would seem like it's romantic or sexual. And honestly, I think that's part of the reason why war movies are so popular with men, because you can see these moments of guys bonding with each other, but the idea of these men are getting close to one another and being emotionally intimate is mitigated by the violence going on around them, so it's acceptable. But in terms of getting back to the question, sometimes what you have to do is be the first person to make the opening move. And it doesn't mean that you have to, have that big moment of, I love you, man, and just like, feelings dump all over them. It's just, you have to kind of be a little more expressive and be willing to express how you feel and share your feelings. And sometimes this means just opening up and letting your guard down and telling them how you really feel. Like, hey, I've got this thing going on in my life and I'm really scared or I'm really upset about it and I could use some help or some comfort. And other times it's being more expressive with the fact that they are in your life and you appreciate that. I mean, think of how rarely we tell our guy friends, you know what? You're there for me a lot. And that means a lot to me.
We don't see it a lot. Yeah, this monopolization that we imagine that women have versus what men have, where we embody logic and women embody emotion, this bullshit dichotomy also kind of speaks to this in kind of a roundabout, oblique way. But men, especially in the last few years or so, there seems to be like this whole wave or movement of men en masse, almost like in large numbers, voicing almost like an existential anxiety about their role in society. the importance of women's autonomy and intelligence is being more and more pushed for and fought for. I was speaking in a previous episode with a woman, Sarah Nicholson, who recently graduated with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering and spent her whole education surrounded mostly by men. And she talked about this feeling that men have that they're being disenfranchised by women who are taking or stepping into the roles previously dominated by men. So I wonder if you have any insight on what actually are a lot of men afraid of. Are they actually afraid of having their imagined positions and roles being taken away somehow?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times it's just a case of when you're used to superiority, equality feels like you're losing something. And we treat status or position in society as a zero-sum game, that one person has to be on top and the other person has to be on the bottom. And we can't necessarily be a society of equals or near as we can get there. And it's interesting how these ideas have changed over time, because for a long time, we only have to look at the STEM fields. For a very long time, computer programming was seen as women's work. Most of the computer programmers were women, and Hidden Figures was a really great story about the women who did the math that ran the Apollo program. And this changed as people started to see it less as drudgery and more as important, vital intellectual work. And so suddenly it was increasingly taken away from women and given towards men and given more importance. And we see this in other areas too. We've seen this in teaching, and we've seen this in childcare and medicine, where things that are traditionally considered to be, drudgery were given to women. And then as soon as it started having social cachet or societal cachet, then suddenly it's important for men to be doing. And this identity crisis is kind of self-inflicted because we keep on defining ourselves in opposition to something. So it's not just, it's getting back to the external locus control. It's not that you are a man because you identify as a man. It's you're a man because you're not a woman. And so if women are doing things that are considered to be man work, air quotes, then what does that mean? Suddenly you're not defined by the things that you do, and that gets scary. And now people are having to kind of question their assumptions about what all of this means. And they don't, and change, admittedly, is scary. Societal change can be uncomfortable, but a lot of times it's necessary.
To kind of switch tracks a little bit, I wanted to kind of get into some of the major myths that you address, as far as like getting down from like the more philosophical stuff and into the nitty-gritty of dating. So what are some of the most frequent questions you get as far as what people are wondering and are befuddled and confused about as far as dating in the 21st century? Let's start with the friend zone.
Oh, yeah, that was where I was going to go first.
And yeah, the reason I bring this up is because this came up in my own workplace with a female coworker who a male coworker of mine is interested in, and she told him, "Hey, I just consider you a good friend." And the other male coworkers around him are just, constantly teasing him about how does the friend zone feel? And it seems to me that the friend zone doesn't really exist as anything more than an entitlement narrative.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there is no such thing as the friend zone. And the only reason why I keep using the phrase is because it's a common, term of art. So at least if I say that, people immediately understand what I mean. But really, when we talk about the friend zone, when guys talk about being put in the friend zone, they talk about it like it's something that's being done to them. It's like they've been thrown into prison or into the phantom zone, and it's because fuck you, penis, that's why. But in reality, all that's going on is that this person isn't interested in you, either sexually or romantically or both. It's not like someone is not screwing at you. It's just they don't think of you that way. They're not attracted to you. And as much as that sucks, that's all there is to it. And the way that you get out of the friend zone ultimately is either you don't get in there in the first place by making sure that it is clear from the start that you are interested in this person and they know that you're interested in them as a potential lover, or you let go of the attempt to get into a relationship with them. They're not interested, so you say, okay, cool, and move on. Now, the reason why people are quote unquote stuck in the friend zone is because they don't want to accept that this person just doesn't like them the way that they want to be liked. Mm-hmm. And it's a shame, but there's a line by Tim Minchin in a song. It's called If I Didn't Have You. And the lyric goes, your love is 1 in a million. It's valuable beyond price. But of the 9,900,999 plus other loves, some of them statistically would be just as nice. And yeah, this person who you're into who's not into you, I'm sure that they are awesome. I'm sure that they, cartoon birds do their hair in the morning and they're just like, they're all sunshine and ice cream. But there are other people out there who are just as awesome, who are just as hot, and who, more importantly, are interested in what you have to offer. So instead of getting hung up on this one person and torturing yourself and creating this false narrative that they are cruelly denying you what you deserve, it's better to say, okay, cool, peace out, and then go find the person who does want what you have.
I'm thinking about what people might say in response to that. So there's the advice of don't put yourself in the friend zone situation to begin with, where be clear about how you feel about this person right from the beginning. What about situations where you have been friends with this person for a while, but only recently or only later developed romantic feelings for them? So there are nuances and complications in talking and thinking about these things.
Yeah, I mean, that happens a lot. And there are a lot of times where you're friends with someone and, oh, hey, you caught feels. Mm-hmm. That happens. And so what do you do about it? Well, odds are you put yourself out there and say, hey, listen, I really appreciate the relationship we have. And I'm starting to feel more. And I'm wondering, is there a chance that you feel the same way? Would you like to go on a date? Mm-hmm. And, now they have the chance to say yes or no. And it's, again, you're in the same place. Either they say no, and it's a shame. Hopefully you can maintain that friendship. It won't be too painful for you to be around. Or they say yes, and now you have a chance to explore a new and different sort of relationship.
Yeah, I really like the thought that's been captured in a few memes I've seen. This idea that you can't be caught in the friend zone if you value having women as friends. And I think that's something that's missing in a lot of people who meant that they're stuck in the friend zone and they feel tortured by not getting what they feel they deserve or not getting the attention that they feel they've earned for themselves. I think that valuing women as friends and wanting to hold on to a friendship has a lot of value in and of itself, and that men should be thankful or grateful to hold on to a friendship at least. And if it doesn't tank, if she doesn't refuse to see you anymore, which happens often enough, I'm sure, then that's a shame. If you can hold on to the friendship, that's something to cherish. And at least you have that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the problems I have with the concept of the friend zone, is that it treats friendship as the secondary prize to romantic relationships, as though friendship isn't valuable in and of itself, as though there isn't benefit to being friends with someone that you may or may not be sleeping with. And it's also, if you really want to get kind of, utilitarian about it, it's a little short-sighted because, okay, this person may not be interested in you. She may not be the one who wants to date you. If you're a cool guy and you're still friends, she may be the one who introduces you to the person who does want to date you. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you really want to have some enlightened self-interest, that's one way to look at it.
Keep that potential possibility open for yourself instead of being an asshole about it and making her not want to introduce you to anybody. That's one way of looking at it for sure. Another common myth, this idea of dating leagues, is one of the most pernicious to me. This idea that physical attractiveness holds a certain value that supersedes all other factors. And this is the way you and most others have defined this idea of leagues. Is there any other sense in which the idea of leagues applies, like as far as like class or like level of education or anything like that? Or is it mostly just a phenomenon at the level of physical attractiveness?
It hits at a lot of levels. I mean, physical attractiveness is usually the first one that comes along that people talk about, but people also talk about being out of their league when they're talking about, difference in class. If someone is blue collar dating someone who has a more white collar type of job, or educational levels where someone may or may not have even finished higher education, but they're dating someone with an advanced degree. But ultimately, the idea of leagues it's kind of like the friend zone in that it doesn't exist. If someone wants to date you, then by definition, you're in their league and they're in yours. One of the things that happens a lot is we tend to conflate the idea of attractive with attracted. And we forget that just because someone is physically good looking, that doesn't make them attractive. It's the old idea of it's not harassment if you're handsome, or it's only harassment if you're ugly, which is the idea that, physical looks trump everything else. And that's not true. I mean, you just have to look at someone like Jared Leto or these days Johnny Depp to see someone who is good looking, but utterly repulsive as a human being.
For sure.
And on the other hand, you can find a lot of people who are not traditionally good looking in a number of different ways, and yet they have this, the French call it the je ne sais quoi, the sense of, I don't know what it is, but they're magnetic. And Serge Gainsbourg is my go-to example, because this man looks like he came straight from Innsmouth. He looks like a frog fell into some nuclear waste and the resulting child looks like him. And yet he got with most of the celebrated beauties of his age, despite the fact that he has a face like a bulldog licking a thistle. and it's not because of his looks, it's because of his presence and his kind of this almost unimaginable charm that he had that had nothing to do with his looks and everything to do with his personality and his passion and his intensity. And he knew how to leverage that into attraction. And that's why you can see so many people who may not be classically good looking, but there is something about them that women love. And it could be anything. There was a YouTuber, I wish to God I could remember his name, but he is, to be polite about it, he's kind of got a dad bod going on. He's soft. But if he opens his mouth and starts singing, he has got a baritone that shakes the walls, and it's amazing. And women who hear that are just kind of like, oh, whoa, did it get warm in here, or is it just me? And that's just one of those ways that you may not be the best looking person in the world, but there are other things that women value and that women would find desirable. And those things are what put you in their league. It just means that you bring something to the table that people want. And yeah, there are shallow folks out there who only want someone who is, equally as good looking as they are.
If you think about it with your head, instead of with certain other organs, it should be clear that you wouldn't want to be with that person anyway, because down the road, looks are going to go away and change. So,
oh yeah, no, time and gravity make fools of us all.
Yeah, so that is a shifting sand kind of foundation to want to be with somebody for. What would you say to somebody who, I'm sure you've heard this a lot, people who, and I've caught myself saying it too, where you think to yourself, often unconsciously and sometimes consciously, that, well, I don't have anything. Like, I've got nothing that's desirable, that I've got nothing to contribute.
Yeah, my first thought is, okay, cool, so start developing it. I mean, that is one of the things that kind of frustrates me when people say that, because what they're doing is that they're just abdicating responsibility and control of their own life. It's like, okay, so first of all, I don't believe you. Everybody has got something, and it may not be the most developed thing in the world, it may not be the greatest thing in the world, but everybody has got something. But even if I concede the argument that no, there is literally nothing in your life that is any good, cool, are you dead? No? Then you can change.
Yep.
And you just have to kind of be you have to be a self-starter in a lot of ways to make it happen.
And that's why I say I catch myself thinking that way, because it goes back to this friend zone thing where you turn yourself into a victim of something instead of taking a responsibility. You turn yourself into like the tragic hero. So it might seem self-effacing, it might seem humble, but it's actually not. It's actually the opposite. It's painting yourself as, like I said before, the tragic hero who doesn't have anything to offer.
Yeah, through a cruel twist of fate, you've been denied what you want so much, and there's nothing you can do about it except shake your fists at the heavens.
And we've seen what that kind of mindset leads to on the extreme side of things with Elliot Rodgers and people like him.
Yeah, and it's kind of, if they weren't so toxic and if that toxicity didn't result in tragedy so often, the incel community would be kind of fascinating into the level of which that they have developed their own mythology and their own, like, phrenology, really. As they're sitting there talking about, you know, things like looks maxing and just coming down with calipers and trying to define just the necessary ratio they have to have between brow ridge to jawline, or index finger to ring finger ratios and prenatal testosterone exposure, when not only does none of that matter to the level that they think it does, but no one, and I mean no one, looks at it the way that they do. And half the time they can't even agree who's good looking or who isn't. There was a thread that I saw when I was doing some research on the incel community, where they were complaining that by their own standards, actor Jensen Ackles should not be as popular as he is. Like, his eyes, I guess, are too squinty or something, and his jawline isn't sufficiently square. And yet, if you ask a lot of people, he is like 6 feet tall and full of yum, and they can't figure out what the deal is. And instead of taking a moment to say, oh, maybe we're completely wrong about all of this, they're just kind of trying to twist themselves into knots, trying to figure out why this guy and so many other people like him are supposedly exceptions to the rule.
This whole incel movement thing is just insane to me. It's one of those things where it feels like it burst onto the scene all of a sudden, but there must have been some factors leading up to it, and the signs were in the air, so to speak, and the influences and the causes were hanging around. Like, the incel phenomenon didn't just appear out of nowhere. Have you come across any insight in your research about, like, how this insane movement came about, where these men aren't even being subtle about it anymore? They're actually literally threatening to kill women.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's fascinating about the incel community is that it was created by a bisexual woman, and she was having a difficult time finding a partner, and she coined the term involuntarily celibate, and she created a forum as a support group. And, you know, as well-intentioned as she was, she made a mistake that a lot of people make in the idea of, well, I have to accept everybody and not really question it. And in being as open and as accepting as she was, and as the community she created was, they allowed in not just people who are understandably and legitimately frustrated that they are having a hard time finding love or sex, but also a lot of people who are having a hard time, but it's curdled their soul, and they're bitter and angry about it, and they're lashing out at other people. And what ends up happening is what happens a lot of times in communities where there is no moderation, where the loudest and the worst actors end up taking over because they push everybody else out by being so hostile and so antagonistic to anybody who doesn't act or believe like they do. And we've seen that behavior in a lot of social media. We've seen that on Facebook and on Twitter, where people just harass folks clean off the site. And as a result, you just have the loudest, most obnoxious, and in many cases, the most malicious people left. And that's ultimately what happened with the incel community. She got chased out of her own community, and it ended up being left to the loudest and angriest voices. When you get that sort of a situation, you end up with a real echo chamber where just everybody is kind of striving to match or out-impress everybody else by being even louder or more extreme about it. And that inevitably ends in tragedy, because for all that you've got the people who are just trying to be angry and shock each other, you've also got people who are like, I'm going to take it to the next level. I'm going to actually do something about this. And this, we've seen it happen time and time again. We've seen it in Montreal with the École de Polytechnique, I think that was the name of it, massacre in the late 90s, early 2000s. We've seen it with Elliot Rodger. We've seen it with Alec Manassian and a whole bunch of other people. And it's rage and anger turned outwards and, resulting in tragedy.
It's terrible. Another issue I wanted to hit on that you've been talking a lot about recently because of recent events is telling the difference between harassment and flirting. This is also an instance of men, for really illegitimate reasons, feeling this same existential angst that makes them feel displaced in the first place, where, and this was news to me, I can't even flirt with women without going to jail.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of amazed at all the number of men who've been thrown in jail because they said hi to a woman. I mean, it's the tragedy of our era. This is one of those times where it's a hot button issue because it's really easy, and especially if you're talking about it in public spaces like Twitter, on Tumblr, and other places, to have people who have really strong opinions on both sides. And so you'll have, if you question it, then you're very likely to be dogpiled by one group or another. Either people who are very much no flirting in the office ever, or people who are like, it's unfair that I'm not allowed to do this. And for a lot of people, it's, I just want to know what the rules are. And the problem is that there aren't rules because it's about individual comfort. You can't really make rules of behavior that are going to cover everybody.
Right, and cover all contexts, because the social context changed as well.
Yeah, because there are people who are good at reading the room and reading people's signals and understanding, like, okay, this person is interested in flirting with me, therefore I can flirt with her. And to an outsider, it may seem a little extreme, but it's because we have been communicating back and forth, sometimes on a nonverbal level, that this behavior is acceptable. Whereas somebody else who is trying to do and say the same things with the same person is going to be told, no, don't do that. That makes me uncomfortable. And it's got nothing to do with this one person can get away with it and the other person can't. It's just that this one person could read the things and was staying where he was welcome and avoiding where he wasn't. And I am sympathetic to people who are legitimately concerned and worried about making a mistake. The big thing is that, to a certain extent, men, I think, understand that for a very long time, even if we had no malice, even if we had no ill intention, as I believe most people didn't, we were getting away with stuff that probably crossed a line. But up until now, there were no consequences for that, so it was a little easier to ignore it and pretend that there wasn't a problem. But now that we have to worry about where the line is, a lot of people have never had to think about where the line is before, and now they don't know where to start with it, and it's kind of freaking them out. And they're worried that they're going to trip over it, and it's going to cost them their jobs or their livelihood or whatever. And honestly, I've gotten to a point where I want to write a macro that reminds everybody that Chris Hardwick just got his job back. And like, after having been fired, because it turns out that he was really abusing his ex-girlfriend. And, a lot of people were saying, well, like, you see one errant story on Medium and it's cost a man his job. Well, the dude got his job back, and like I said before, Johnny Depp still has a career. Jared Leto still has a career. It isn't just a case of like one accusation and it's over. It doesn't work like that.
When I think about this whole anxiety over what if I make a mistake? What if I end up harassing them on accident? I think, like I said, you can kind of understand the anxiety to an extent. It also seems to me like it undervalues the intelligence of women, that you should be able to recognize and acknowledge that women are intelligent enough to know when you made an honest mistake and when you didn't.
Yeah, women aren't stupid. They can tell the difference between somebody who accidentally stuck their foot in their mouth and somebody who's a predator. And other times, it's just a matter of personal responsibility, because I will be the first to admit, I've crossed the line more times than I care to think about, usually out of ignorance, or because I made a stupid decision. I had too much to drink, and now I think I'm much more suave and someone much more into me than they actually are. It's like, nope, they're putting up with my ass, and I'm being a complete asshole to them. And when that happens, and when it's happened to me, the only thing to do is say, oh, shit, I'm sorry. I was a huge, huge asshole to you. I am so very sorry about that. And not to say it in like, oh, I had too much to drink, therefore it wasn't who I am. It's like, no, I made that decision, and then I made bad decisions afterwards. And you know what? I am very sorry about all of this. And take responsibility for it. I mean, it sucks, and sometimes there will be consequences for it, but you kind of have to accept that. And it blows, but it's part of being being an adult. You have to deal with the fact that sometimes you screw up, and sometimes you're going to have to deal with the results of that.
Do you get a lot of questions about online dating, or more specifically, long distance dating? This is something that is relevant to my own situation, where I'm kind of an introvert. I don't go out and socialize very often. I'm very socially awkward. I don't particularly enjoy the bar scene or the nightclub scene myself. The people I really like and are attracted to have always been people I've met on social media. Do you encounter this concern or this question to any frequency or regularly, how you approach a long distance relationship via online interaction, and whether that changes any of the dynamics that you should learn or relearn?
Yeah, well, when you're dealing with online relationships, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be primarily text. And you kind of have to be careful with that, because we are, humans are, for lack of a better term, designed for face-to-face communication. There is a wealth of information that we get about people that defines whether or not we're going to be attracted to them or not, that we only get when we are in physical proximity to them. And even when we're using video chat, FaceTime, Skype, whatever, there are a lot of clues and cues that we are just not going to pick up on, because we are not able to do things like we can't smell them. We don't see how they interact with other. Well, yeah, it's a joke. It sounds like a joke, but it really is. It's not even a pheromonal thing. It's just, do you like the way that they smell? It may be that they have a perfume that you just don't care for. They may not be, their hygiene may or may not be great, or it just may be there's just something about the way that they smell that you just don't care for. Other times it's, all right, how do they interact with other people? Do you really want to be on a date with someone who is really like rude or mean to the waitstaff, or to watch how they interact with people who they get frustrated by? So when you are interacting with someone via text or even via Skype, you're missing a lot of information. So what can happen is that a lot of times you can end up with false positives, people who you've got great emotional or intellectual chemistry, where you can have amazing conversations and you can really enjoy each other's company, and you enjoy talking, you really value their thoughts, their input, and they're a good friend to you. But when you meet them in person, the physical side just isn't there. And sometimes that's really frustrating, because we kind of feel like, with true soulmates, we should be able to look past the physical. But no, we are luminous beings, but we're also crude matter, and that makes a difference.
Yeah, we shouldn't subordinate the crude matter part to the quote-unquote luminous part.
Yeah, I mean, we all, like, sexual attraction is going to win in the end. It doesn't matter how like many great conversations you have. If the two of you just don't have that physical chemistry too, I mean, you'll be great friends, don't get me wrong, but in terms of like a sexual or romantic relationship, that gets a lot harder.
It's going to be interesting to see how this kind of develops in the coming years and decades, with social media being such that our communities are self-selected, and so we can meet people on a less random basis than we would just going out on the town. And I think that's going to interesting to see how people deal with the geographical distances that are still a barrier, even though social media has broken down other kinds of barriers to meeting people. I know several friends of mine who have met online initially and then later met and formed a relationship first and then met later in person. And a lot of them have been able to make it work. Others haven't.
It's fascinating to see how all of this happens, because not that long ago, I went to London for the 20th anniversary of a web forum that I was on. And I met people who I've known for literal decades for the first time in person. And it was kind of amazing bridging this gap between I am used to seeing you on this web forum or on Facebook or whatnot, and now here we are in person and hanging out and talking. And there's an interesting adjustment period to some of that. And it's going to be interesting to see how it all happens, because who knows now as forms of transportation change. Like, hey, maybe Elon Musk will get that Hyperloop finished and suddenly we'll have like proper high-speed trains between cities, and that'll change how we interact with people. So maybe we could have a bi-coastal relationship and actually see one another on regular basis without having to spend a small fortune.
I don't know if you've seen that meme that has the first panel is this city girl. She was a city girl from New York, and the lower panel has this farm boy on the farm, and he was a farm boy on this farm, and it said, but it was 1879 and they never met because there was no transportation at the end. So like it sets up this potential tropish romance story. Reading and recognizing signs of romantic interest. This is something that I'm sure mostly affects, I'm sure it affects everybody to an extent, but probably especially people who aren't that well versed in social cues and parsing social situations. And probably the kinds of people who would read dating advice books in the first place. So kind of give a general overview of how you know when somebody is romantically interested in you and how to recognize that and read that.
Well, this is one of those times where it's a lot easier when you have visual aids to go with it, because it makes it simpler. And I'm actually working on a video about how to read signs, and I'm trying to gather a couple of actresses to give some demonstrations of what I call signs of interest or indicators.
Oh, nice.
But the most obvious version is eye contact and a smile. If someone is interested in you and wants you to come talk to them, they will usually make a point of making eye contact with you, and then they're going to smile at you. And it's going to be a slow and genuine smile. One that actually, it's called a Duchenne smile because it reaches the corners of your eyes and causes these telltale crinkles. Other indications that somebody is interested in you is going to be in sometimes how much are they laughing at your jokes? Are they using a lot of ingratiating behavior? Are they laughing a lot harder at your jokes than your jokes deserve? Another one is mirroring. Are they subtly matching your body language or your tone of voice or the cadence of your speech? Some people will talk about how they're natural mimics, how if they're talking with someone, they realize not too long afterwards they've picked up this person's cadence or way of speaking or their accent. And that's a way of trying to ingratiate themselves unconsciously, because we like people who are similar to us. And so one of the ways we send that similarity signal is to have similar body language. So if you're talking with someone and you take a drink and they take a drink at the same time, that's often a signal that they're kind of into you. And that's often one that they don't think about. Other ones are physical contact, or what I call reciprocal contact, where if you touch somebody and then you disengage and then they immediately touch you back, that's usually a sign of interest. The tricky thing is that any one particular behavior is noise. You have no basis of context. For one person, it could just be a touchy-feely person. They just, they're very at ease with touching folks and being touched. Other people may not be touchy at all, and they may be uncomfortable with being touched even by close family members. And so that doesn't give you much information. Someone who may look at you and smile may be romantically interested in you, or maybe they're just a friendly person. What you want to do is look for clusters of signals. Because any one thing, somebody who has their arms crossed, maybe they're closed off and unfriendly, maybe they're just cold. But someone who has, their arms are crossed, their head is down, and they're looking away from you, that's all put together. Those are signs they're not interested. Whereas somebody who is looking at you and smiling, who is touching you and standing much closer to you than they need to, who's laughing so hard at jokes that you're kind of like, I didn't think it was that funny. That is someone who probably digs you. But one of the things I'm always telling people is, if you don't know, then ask. Because it's a lot easier to say, hey, I feel like I'm catching a vibe here, am I wrong? Than it is to make an assumption and roll on it and then be shocked when you find out that no, you got it completely wrong.
Something that some of my friends have asked, I've asked it, we've talked about it. This whole idea, and I think this is a question that's really a 21st century kind of question, and really a question that comes up because of social media, where, time to change that relationship status on Facebook. At what point do you know that she's your girlfriend, he's your boyfriend? I kind of have a philosophical bent because I studied philosophy in college, strangely enough. So I kind of philosophize about this. Like, what is
Yeah.
the understanding that you're in a relationship unspoken, or do you actually like sit down and have a meeting and say, okay, we are starting now officially boyfriend and girlfriend?
Yeah, I recommend doing exactly that. I recommend that people have a defining the relationship conversation. Because a lot of times, one of the conflicts that people have in relationships is that they tend to assume the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem, because what some people are okay with, other people aren't. But if you're not on the same page, you're going to run into complications. Because what is one person may consider, may think that they're not exclusive unless they've had the "are we exclusive" conversation, where somebody else may assume that, okay, we've gone on a couple of dates, we are exclusive now. And that's going to be a conflict. Or for that matter, what would be considered cheating? For some people, like, kissing somebody isn't cheating. For some other people, like, so much as like masturbating, watching porn is cheating. These are conversations that you want to have so that you understand what you're both expecting and to kind of set the rules for yourselves. I mean, the great thing about relationships is that the rules are whatever you both agree to, and nobody can tell you that you're wrong if it works for the two of you.
I would be really interested to see a video done on polyamory. I've got several polyamorous friends. Each of my friends who are polyamorous in different relationships have distinct sets of rules specific to their relationships. And it's a really fascinating dynamic to observe.
Yeah. If you're going to be poly, the most important thing is clear and open communication at all times. Because, man, if you think dating in general is hard, dating when you're trying to juggle more than one person is gonna blow your mind.
Yeah, that's what's fascinating to me about it, is that it blows my mind, because dating one person is a challenge for me, as it is for so many people. I guess in wrapping up, is there anything you want to leave off with, like a personal message to the masses, to everybody listening?
Yeah, there is always room for growth and improvement, no matter where you are and no matter how you feel that things are. You may not necessarily be where you would like to be now, but that doesn't matter, because you can grow and you can change. It is never too late. It doesn't matter if you're an older virgin. It doesn't matter if you lost your virginity at 15. Everybody starts at their own place. Everybody starts at their own pace. And you're not in competition with anybody. You are just working with yourself and your story. And as long as you're alive, you have the chance to do better.
Where can people find you? I will have links to all of your stuff in the show notes to this episode. But if you want to, for people who, for whatever reason, might not be able to see the show notes or listening in their car or whatever, where can people find you and your work?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Doctor NerdLove. You can join the Facebook page at facebook.com/Doctor NerdLove. You can also find my YouTube channel at youtube.com/user/Doctor NerdLove, strangely enough. And of course, there's my website, drnerdlove.com.
I will have links to all of that, as I said. And Harris O'Malley, aka Dr. NerdLove, thank you so much for spending your valuable time chatting with me.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Thank you for listening to A Leap of Doubt. If you liked what you heard, please consider leaving a review on iTunes. If you want to get involved in the kinds of discussion this show is meant to encourage, you can find the official discussion group on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/A Leap of Doubt. You can follow me and get in touch with me on Twitter, where my username is @TheNatheist. Feedback and criticisms are always welcome. The opening clip is an excerpt from the audiobook God Is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens, courtesy of Hachette Audio. Text copyright 2007 by Christopher Hitchens. Audio production copyright 2007 Hachette Audio. Used with permission. The opening and ending music is Jade by Esther Nicholson and is used under license. The audio was edited by Rich Lyons of the Living After Faith podcast. A very special shout out and heartfelt thanks goes out to my 4 patrons, Jeff Prebeg, Jeanne Ikerd, Torsten Pihl, and Chris Watson. If you enjoy the work I do, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon at patreon.com/A Leap of Doubt.